We're told that upwards of 80% of the people who live in that city followed the mandatory evacuation orders. And many people, those who had no other options, no other place to go, didn't have the proper transportation, ended up in the Louisiana Superdome, where normally the New Orleans Saints play.
So when I was 12 years old, I was living in New Orleans, Louisiana with my family of 7 in a really cramped apartment. I believe it was 2 bedrooms, and my grandparents were staying there with us at the time as well. And so it was really crowded, but it was kind of the norm for us. So that was nothing unusual. I just recall it being a very more than crowded house the Friday before Hurricane Katrina hit, because we had some neighbors over and everyone was pretty much freaking out. The Weather Channel was saying that there was a hurricane coming in our direction, and that wasn't anything new for New Orleans, but it was still pretty panicky because it was a Category 5. When they said that it might be a direct hit, we had like every television set on the news, and my parents were running back and forth, and I was just chilling. I was on the phone with my best friend at the time. I believe I was in 6th grade, and she and I were just like making fun of our families basically for how much they were freaking out for nothing, or what we thought was nothing. And so I remember telling her before we got off the phone that I would see her Monday, like it was no big deal. And it turns out I've never seen her since. After my parents went back and forth all Friday night about what we would do, because we didn't have a car and we didn't really have money to get out of town, we decided to go to the Superdome.
And many people, those who had no other options, no other place to go, didn't have the proper transportation, ended up in the Louisiana Superdome, where normally the New Orleans Saints play.
And when we got there, like as soon as we hit the corner where the Superdome was, people were like lining up like for, it looked like miles. Like everyone was around every single corner in downtown New Orleans, and they were all trying to get into this one stadium. So it was pretty bizarre for me. I didn't think it was that big of a deal. And as soon as we got through the doors, which took like maybe 2 hours after waiting in line, it started raining, like really hard immediately. So it was creepy, but I was kind of like, I felt lucky because we had just missed it. And so we're getting through the little security checks, and they're like looking for drugs and guns or whatever. But we get through the crowd, and my family and I find a spot in the stadium, like the main football stadium. And so we're sitting there and settling down for a few hours, really confused, but I'm just listening to my parents, and they're telling me to calm down and just, wait things out. We shouldn't be there more than a few days, was what my dad told me at the time. About 2 a.m. The next morning, it started to rain through the Superdome. So we didn't see like any major cracks or anything, but I guess it was just, the rain was that heavy, it was seeping through somewhere. And so it started raining through like the ceiling of the stadium. And then we like started hearing some sirens. And it sounded almost like a train siren, so like a really, really heavy horn. And everyone at the time in New Orleans, or Louisiana in general, knew what that meant. So it was actually tornadoes that were coming to us. Like it was really quiet at first, like strangely quiet, and then suddenly people are screaming and they're running and it's chaotic. And so we head out through the stadium doors, like towards the back where the little mini bars are, and we kind of huddle up behind it. And like it's crazy. Like the view I remember of seeing people just like run for their lives was out of like a crazy horror movie. Like it was really surreal for me at the time, especially being so young. I mean, I didn't know if people were dying right in front of me or not. Word got around that buses were heading in our direction, and this was days later. So it's after like hours and hours of just feeling so desperate for information, and no one was giving it to us. And so when the buses come through, they come on the highway, and there's this little opening to the parking lot where they're parking and people are lining up to get to them. And it's just like when we first got to the Superdome. There are lines and lines and lines of people and families. And we actually ended up waiting 2 days outside in this line. And so when we get to the front, there's actually a helicopter over us. And it's saying that, or people are saying that it's the president. At the time, it was George Bush. And so I'm excited. I'm like, ooh, the president's here. Like, that's cool. Like, I felt special. For a moment, I didn't feel like I was so desperate. Like, it just seemed like I was going to be on TV. When his helicopter flew over us, it got low enough to the point where we couldn't quite see him, but it blew dirt in everyone's faces. And then a few minutes pass by, and it's just hovering there, and we're still confused, and then it leaves. That was the first time I realized that we were literally abandoned. So after that moment, I felt completely helpless. I'd reached my peak of depression from my entire experience there at the Superdome. And that feeling of hopelessness and abandonment dragged on throughout middle school and high school. And it wasn't until my senior year when I began taking government and economic courses that I began to make the connections. And I would see that there was this link between the structure of politics and the news and what I had experienced there as a child. And so I began to acknowledge how Katrina had displaced me, not only physically, but psychologically and emotionally. And I mean, in every possible way, I had become this new person. As I began to wake up and acknowledge that this political world around me affects my life in so many direct ways, I became more engulfed in the news and current events. And I have become this news junkie, so to speak, because I always want to be connected and aware of what's happening in the world, and I want to be prepared for how that can affect my life. So as a queer woman of color, I'd like to think that I have a unique perspective on politics, and I'm going to use that in this vlog and show you guys many different connections, from elections to other types of political situations. And if you stay tuned to Democrazy, I hope that you would appreciate that interesting perspective and find some way to apply it to your life.